I still can't believe this is actually happening. Forza Horizon 5, a game that's basically been one of the biggest Xbox exclusives for years, is coming to PS5. Like, what even is reality anymore? And get this, it's actually gonna look better on PS5 Pro than it does on Xbox. That just feels unreal. So, Playground Games finally dropped all the details, and yeah, it's full crossplay, it's got all the graphical modes, and on PS5 Pro, it's getting actual in-game ray tracing during races and free roam. Meanwhile, on Xbox, you only get that in garages. They're giving us the usual 2 graphics modes, performance mode at 60 for smooth gameplay, quality mode at 30, but with ray-traced reflections. And if you grab the premium edition, you get to start playing 3 days early on April 25th, 2025. Otherwise, the full launch is April 28th. Oh, and they're throwing in some free cars and in-game currency for pre-orders. Yeah, so you'll be able to race with your Xbox friends from day one, which is honestly pretty cool. Like, I never thought we'd see the day where Forza is on PlayStation, and yet here we are. But the craziest thing for me, if Forza is making the jump, then that means we're one step closer to seeing Gears of War and even Halo on PS5. Just imagine booting up Halo Infinite on a PlayStation 5. AMD finally dropped RDNA 4, and it actually looks like the GPU market might have a real shakeup. The RX 9070 XT and RX 9070 are coming March 6th, and they're bringing way more power than expected, at prices that make NVIDIA's RTX 50 series look like a joke. Like, think about this. The RX 9070 XT costs $599. That's cheaper than a 5070 Ti. But here's the crazy part. It outperforms it in almost every way. And if you check online right now, the 5070 Ti is going for like $1,200 in some places. Meanwhile, AMD is just out here casually offering better performance for literally half the price. AMD hasn't exactly been killing it with ray tracing in the past, but RDNA 4 is actually fixing that. They've doubled ray tracing performance with new accelerators and memory optimizations, meaning stuff like Cyberpunk 2077 with RT won't be a slideshow anymore. The result? A claimed 66% performance boost in ray-traced games like Cyberpunk 2077 and F124 compared to the RX 7900 GR. And get this, AMD finally using machine learning for its upscaling. FSR4 is supposed to be a real DLSS competitor now. FSR4 is exclusive to these cards. So if you're still rocking an RDNA 3 GPU, tough luck, but at least it means AMD is taking upscaling seriously now. The gaming industry is kind of like a massive machine, tons of moving parts, and sometimes, even if you have something special, you need the right people backing you to make sure it gets the attention it deserves. That's exactly what happened with Stellar Blade. So here's something kinda weird. Sony Interactive Entertainment Europe is publishing a game, but it's not carrying the PlayStation Studios branding. Not a huge deal, but definitely interesting. Usually, games published by Sony, whether it's a first-party studio or a second-party deal, get that big, flashy PlayStation Studios intro, even if the studio itself isn't owned by Sony. We saw it with Sackboy, Helldivers 2, Rise of the Ronin, Destruction All-Stars, and even Demon's Souls and Returnal before their developers officially became PlayStation Studios. But for this game, nothing. It's got the typical SIE presence text when you launch it, but no fancy PlayStation Studios branding. And that raises the question, why? There are a few possibilities here. Sony has multiple publishing arms, and not everything they publish falls under the PlayStation Studios label. There's the SIE Publishing Division, which handles third-party games in certain regions. For example, Sony published Call of Duty Vanguard and Black Ops Cold War in Japan, while Activision Blizzard published them everywhere else. They did the same for Neo 2, where Koei Tecmo published it in Japan, but Sony handled it worldwide. Even Destiny 2 was published by SIE in Japan, so maybe this game just falls under that category. A game Sony is publishing, but not one they're treating as a PlayStation Studios project. One theory floating around is that Sony put more resources into this game than expected. It may have started as an indie-sized project, but with PlayStation's funding and ex-dev support, it ended up looking more like a AAA release. So does it deserve the PlayStation Studios branding? Some say yes, some say no. On the other hand, maybe Sony doesn't want to be too attached to the game, possibly because of controversy. There's speculation that they're playing it safe because the game features attractive female characters in suggestive outfits, and they don't want to deal with any backlash. Could be reaching, but Sony has been cautious with how they market certain games in recent years, so it's not completely out of the question. Honestly, this just adds to the ever-growing confusion around what counts as a PlayStation Studios game. You've got first-party PlayStation Studios games like God of War, The Last of Us, and Ghost of Tsushima. Second-party games where Sony funds and publishes a game, but doesn't own the studio, like Helldivers 2 and Rise of the Ronin. Third-party exclusives, where a game is exclusive to PlayStation for a time, but isn't developed or published by Sony. SIE Publishing handling third-party games in specific regions. At this point, the lines are so blurred that it's getting hard to tell what actually counts as a PlayStation Studios game anymore. Does it even matter? For a lot of people, probably not. If you can play it on PS5, that's all that really matters. But for branding nerds like us, it's an interesting question. Why does some Sony-published stuff get the PlayStation Studios treatment while others don't? Maybe it's all just a contract thing. Or maybe Sony is trying to be strategic about which games they fully associate with their brand. What do you think? Is Sony downplaying its involvement? Or is this just a quirk of their publishing setup? So, Shuhei Yoshida shared in a chat with Last Stand Media. He revealed that back when Stellar Blade was just Project Eve, Sony's third-party relations team was scouting new talent in Asia, particularly China and Korea, as potential growth markets for gaming. They spotted what ShiftUp was working on and liked what they saw, but before sealing the deal, they sent Yoshida to check it out in person. They looked at what ShiftUp started working on, Project Eve, and they really liked it, and they asked me to go visit the studio right before COVID happened to check out the game and play the game and talk with Kim-san. I became a fan and promoted the game internally. Come on, this is a great game, sign it up. And he was absolutely right. Stellar Blade became not just a hit on PS5, but a solid seller too. Over 1 million copies in under 2 months. On top of that, it built up huge goodwill with fans, thanks to crossover events with other franchises and plenty more on the way. Now the game is making its way to PC, as revealed during the latest State of Play, but it's not just a port, it's getting new story content added as well. Could it be setting up a sequel? No one knows for sure, but it definitely feels like ShiftUp is far from done with the world of Stellar Blade. So you know how every game these days tries to sneak in live service nonsense? Turns out, fans pushed back hard enough on Warhammer 40k, Space Marine 2, and Focus Entertainment actually listened. Basically, people weren't happy with how the game was handling limited-time events, where some of the best cosmetics were locked behind FOMO-inducing challenges. It started to feel like the first step toward a full live service model, and players weren't having it. So after a ton of backlash, Focus had to come out and address the situation directly. In their latest community update, they basically said, yeah, we kinda messed up. They clarified that Space Marine 2 isn't going live service, and that all event-exclusive items will be made available later for everyone. They also apologized for how annoying the current unlock system is, and promised to make it easier and less frustrating. To make things right, they're even giving away the MK7 Errant helmet for free, which, before this, you could only get by grinding victories in operations mode before a specific event ended. So, yeah, players won this round. Honestly, this is a big deal. So many publishers double down on bad decisions, no matter how much players complain. But here, fans said no, and the devs actually listened. So now the question is, does this set a precedent? Are we finally seeing studios back off from the live service obsession? Or is this just a rare exception? Here's a cool story. A Helldivers 2 developer just hinted that the game's next crossover event is in the works, and now players are wondering what universe is about to collide with Super Earth. Over a year after launch, Helldivers 2 is still rolling out fresh content, and these collaborations keep giving players even more chances to spread freedom across the galaxy. The game originally dropped in February 2024 and quickly became one of the biggest co-op shooters of the year, selling over 12 million copies in just 3 months. Players squad up to defend Super Earth from hostile alien factions spreading managed democracy throughout space. With the Meridia storyline now wrapped up, fans are hungry for new content. Major threats are looming, and new enemies might be lurking in the shadows, which means expectations for the next update are sky high. And now we might have our first clue. A Helldivers 2 dev recently teased that a new crossover event is coming. When asked on Discord about future crossovers, developer Cfez said they were in the very early stages of something new. No other details were shared, but that hasn't stopped fans from speculating. Some players think Warhammer 40k is next, especially after a leaked silhouette of a melee weapon that looks suspiciously like the Chainsword from the franchise. So far, Arrowhead Game Studios hasn't confirmed anything, but if true, this could be a massive crossover for the game. This wouldn't be the first time Helldivers 2 has teamed up with another franchise. A while back, the game did a Killzone 2 crossover, bringing in weapons and armor inspired by Sony's classic FPS. If you wanted the full Killzone 2 set, you had to spend 1,975 super credits, which came out to about $19.99 in real-world money. Outside of these crossovers, Helldivers 2 has been getting regular updates. The latest patch introduced balancing changes, bug fixes, and quality-of-life improvements, even temporarily removing the new Terminid enemies for adjustments. Now, with this new crossover, players have another reason to keep imposing freedom across the farthest reaches of space. The only question is, which universe is next?